He thought he could force me out of the house my father built with his own hands. He believed I would stay silent, that I would bow my head and let him erase every trace of the man who raised me. But Steve forgot one crucial thing. My father had been preparing for this day long before he died. And when my attorney walked into that conference room with a manila folder thick as a Bible, Steve's smug grin vanished like smoke. The house wasn't just walls and wood. It was my inheritance, my fortress, and the battlefield where I would finally show him what happens when you try to steal from a Carter. My name is Natalie Carter, and I'm 34 years old. I work as a senior software architect at Blue Peak Systems in Portland, building complex systems that keep millions of users connected. But before I learned to build digital structures, my father taught me how to build real ones, with wood, stone, and sweat. Thomas Carter wasn't just my father. He was a legend in Portland's restoration community. He started Carter Restorations with nothing but a rusty toolbox and a beat-up Ford pickup in 1985. By the time I was born, he'd already restored half the Victorian houses in the Pearl District. People said he could look at a rotting beam and see the tree it once was, could run his hand along crumbling plaster and feel the craftsman who first smoothed it a century ago. Every house has a soul. Nat, he'd tell me, his calloused hands steady on my shoulders as we stood before another project. Our job isn't to change it. It's to help it remember what it used to be. Those weekend lessons started when I was 7. While other kids played video games, I learned the difference between oak and maple by smell alone. I could identify load-bearing walls before I could do long division, but our real classroom wasn't the job sites. It was our garage, where a 1968 Mustang Fastback sat waiting like a patient teacher. That car was our project, our excuse to spend Saturdays covered in grease and talking about everything and nothing. Dad would hand me a wrench, and between turns of the bolt, he'd share his philosophy. Integrity isn't just about being honest, sweetheart. It's about making sure every screw is tight, even the ones nobody will ever see. I'd roll my eyes then, teenage arrogance making me think I knew better. But those lessons sank deeper than I realized. When I switched from restoration to software engineering in college, Dad never showed disappointment. Different materials, same principles, he said, helping me move into my first apartment. You're still building things that last. The house where I grew up, where Mom still lives, was Dad's masterpiece. He bought the 1920s Craftsman bungalow in 1998, when the Laurelhurst neighborhood was still affordable for a working man. Every evening after work, every weekend for 3 years, he restored it with his own hands. I was his assistant, holding flashlights, fetching tools, learning that love could be measured in perfectly mitered corners and hand-sanded floors. The built-in bookshelf in the living room? We spent 2 months on that alone. Dad teaching me about grain patterns and wood stain. The kitchen cabinets? Original 1920s pieces he salvaged from a demolition. Spending weeks stripping decades of paint to reveal the Douglas fir beneath. The workshop in the basement still smells like sawdust and linseed oil, even now. But it was the door frame in the hallway that mattered most. Every year on my birthday, Dad would stand me against it, mark my height with a pencil, and write the date, from age 3 to 18. That door frame tracked my growth, not just in inches, but in memories. The year I broke my arm falling from the apple tree, age 9, 4 feet 2 inches. The year Mom and Dad renewed their vows in the backyard, age 12, 5 feet exactly. The year I got accepted to Oregon State, age 18, 5 feet 7 inches, Dad's eyes wet with pride. This house is our history. Nat, he said the day I left for college. No matter where you go, what you become, this will always be home. I'm leaving it to you in my will, not because you need it, but because you understand what it means. I thought we had decades left together. I thought there would be time for him to teach me more, to finish the Mustang, to maybe restore another house together when I had kids of my own. But hearts don't check calendars. 3 months ago, Dad was supervising a restoration in Eastmoreland, explaining to a young apprentice why you never rush a foundation repair, when his heart simply stopped, 62 years old, strong as an oak beam, gone between one breath and the next. The funeral was a blur of flowers and faces. Mom stood silent, gripping my hand so tight I lost feeling in my fingers. The restoration community came in force: contractors, suppliers, clients whose homes Dad had saved. They all had stories. They all said he was the last of the true craftsmen. But grief changes people in unexpected ways. Mom, who'd been Dad's partner in everything for 35 years, suddenly couldn't bear the silence of the house. The workshop felt like a tomb. The Mustang became a monument to unfinished dreams. She started attending a grief support group at First Presbyterian, seeking comfort in shared sorrow. That's where she met Steve Patterson. Steve Patterson walked into our lives wearing a charcoal suit and a sympathetic smile, carrying a grief that seemed perfectly calibrated to match my mother's, 56 years old, recently widowed. He spoke in the measured tones of someone who understood loss. At the support group, Mom said he was the only one who really listened. He lost his wife to cancer, Mom told me over coffee, 6 weeks after Dad's funeral. 2 years of watching her fade away. He understands what it's like to lose your other half. I wanted to be happy that she'd found someone to talk to. God knows she needed support. I was drowning in my own grief, barely functional at work, spending weekends sitting in Dad's workshop just breathing in the smell of sawdust. But something about Steve's timing felt wrong, too smooth, too convenient. The first time I met him, he showed up at the house with grocery bags and a home-cooked lasagna. "Your mother mentioned she hasn't been eating well," he said, that practiced smile never quite reaching his eyes. I thought I'd help out. He moved through our kitchen like he'd been there before, finding the plates without asking, knowing which drawer held the silverware. Mom watched him with something I hadn't seen since Dad died, a flicker of life in her eyes. I should have been grateful. Instead, my skin crawled. "Your father built an incredible home," Steve said, running his hand along the restored molding in the dining room. "Though I imagine the maintenance must be overwhelming for your mother now." "We manage," I said, sharper than intended. His smile widened, showing too many teeth. "Of course, just offering to help. I flip houses. You know, I understand these old properties." Flip houses. Dad would have hated him on principle alone. House flippers were the vandals of the restoration world, ripping out original features for cheap modern replacements, erasing history for profit margins. 3 months after they met, Steve was spending weekends at the house. 4 months. He had a key. 5 months. Mom announced they were taking things to the next level. "He makes me feel less alone," she said. And how could I argue with that? How could I tell my grieving mother that her new boyfriend made my skin crawl? That his laugh sounded rehearsed? That I'd caught him in Dad's workshop, not touching anything, just standing there, like he was calculating square footage? 6 months after Dad's death, 6 months, Steve Patterson moved in. He brought his life in boxes and bad taste, filling spaces that had been sacred with his presence. His modern furniture clashed with Dad's craftsman aesthetic. His flat-screen TV dominated the living room where we used to read. His exercise equipment turned the sunroom into a gym. "Just temporary," he assured me when I protested, "until we figure out the best arrangement." But then his adult children started visiting. James, 31, a CrossFit instructor with the personality of a protein shake. Lisa, 28, pregnant with her first child, speaking in passive-aggressive sweetness. They walked through my childhood home like they were shopping for real estate. "This place has so much potential," Lisa said. Standing in the kitchen Dad had lovingly restored. "Once you update it, of course, all this old wood is so depressing." The first real betrayal came on a Tuesday. I stopped by after work to find contractors in the living room, ripping out the built-in bookshelf Dad and I had spent months perfecting. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, causing the workers to freeze. Steve appeared from the hallway, dust mask around his neck, looking pleased with himself. "Modernizing. That old shelf was a dust trap and a fire hazard. We're putting in a media center." "That was handcrafted by my father. And now it's being upgraded by me," he said calmly. Your mother agreed. She wants to move forward, not live in a museum. Mom stood behind him, not meeting my eyes. Honey, Steve knows what he's doing. He's increasing the home value. Home value? I felt something break inside me. This isn't an investment property. Mom, this is our home, Dad's home. Your father is gone, Steve said, his voice still maddeningly calm. And the living need to keep living. I found out that night that they'd already replaced the original hardwood floors in the master bedroom with laminate. Laminate. In the room where Dad had spent 6 weeks hand sanding and restoring each board. They'd installed plastic flooring from Home Depot. But the real escalation came 2 weeks later. Steve called a family meeting. His family, not mine. James and Lisa sat on our couch like they owned it, while Steve stood by the fireplace Dad had restored stone by stone. We need to discuss the future of this property, he announced. Margaret and I are planning to marry, and we'll need to make some decisions about ownership. What decisions? I asked, though I already knew where this was going. Well, it's inefficient having the deed in your name when Margaret and I are the ones living here, maintaining it, improving it. He smiled that practiced smile. We should transfer ownership to reflect reality. The reality, I said slowly, is that my father left this house to me, in his will, legal and binding. Steve's smile never wavered. Of course, but surely you want what's best for your mother? She needs stability, security. You wouldn't want to make this difficult for her. The threat was subtle but clear. Choose the house, or choose your relationship with your mother. He'd positioned himself perfectly, the supportive partner just trying to help. While I looked like the selfish daughter clinging to property I didn't even live in. The demolition of my childhood continued with surgical precision. Steve operated like a cancer, eating away at everything Dad had built while maintaining the appearance of improvement. Each week brought fresh devastation dressed as progress. The hand-carved newel post at the bottom of the stairs, outdated and loose, according to Steve, was replaced with a generic metal design from Lowe's. The original brass doorknobs, which Dad had salvaged from a 1915 mansion demolition, disappeared overnight, swapped for brushed nickel for consistency. The clawfoot tub in the upstairs bathroom, which Dad had restored over an entire winter, was torn out and replaced with a fiberglass shower stall. More practical, Steve explained when I confronted him. Your mother's getting older. She needs safety features, not antiques. Mom stood beside him, nodding like a puppet. He's right, honey. I did slip getting out of that old tub last month. You never mentioned that, I said, searching her face for the mother I knew. Well, I didn't want to worry you. You have your own life, your own apartment. Steve's here. He takes care of things. Takes care of things, like he took care of the stained glass transom above the front door, selling it to an antique dealer while I was at work. Like he took care of the vintage brass fixtures in the powder room, replacing them with builder-grade chrome. Like he took care of the original cedar shingles, covering them with vinyl siding that turned our craftsman into another suburban clone. But nothing prepared me for the workshop. I arrived on a Saturday morning to find James in the basement, Dad's tools scattered across the floor like casualties of war. The pegboard where Dad had meticulously organized 3 decades of instruments, each hammer, each chisel in its designated spot, was bare. James was shoving everything into garbage bags. "What are you doing?" My voice came out as a whisper. "Finally cleaning out this hoarder's paradise," James grunted, not looking up. "Dad needs space for a proper home gym. Can't believe anyone kept all this junk." Junk? Dad's 1947 Stanley No. 4 smooth plane, his great-grandfather's claw hammer, brought from Germany in 1889. The Japanese pull saw he'd saved 6 months to buy, sharp enough to slice paper. "Those are precision tools," I managed. "Some are antiques. They're worth—" "Nobody cares about old tools, lady. It's all getting donated to Goodwill. Tax write-off." I lunged for the bags, but James blocked me, his CrossFit muscles forming a wall between me and my father's legacy. "Steve said you might freak out. He also said to remind you that this is his and your mom's house now. You don't live here. I own this house. Yeah? Then why aren't you paying for all these improvements? He smirked, the expression so like his father's, it made my stomach turn. Steve's investing serious money into this place. New roof next month, new windows, all permitted and legal. That's called sweat equity, in case you didn't know. Sweat equity. They were building a legal case for ownership, creating evidence of investment while destroying everything that mattered. I found Mom in the kitchen, baking cookies for Lisa's baby shower. The kitchen smelled wrong. Store-bought dough instead of her homemade recipe. Mom, they're throwing away Dad's tools. Steve says we need to declutter. She wouldn't look at me. He's right. I was holding on to too much. Those tools built this house. They built half the restored homes in Portland. The past is the past, Natalie. Is that Steve talking or you? She finally met my eyes, and for a moment, I saw a flash of the mother I knew. Conflicted, sad, but quickly replaced by something harder. Steve is my future. I'm 59 years old. I'm not going to be alone. If you can't accept that, then what? You'll choose him over me? You're the one making it a choice. That night, I sat in my apartment, looking at photos on my phone. Dad and me in the workshop. Mom and Dad at their anniversary party in the backyard. The three of us standing in front of the house the day I graduated high school. The rhododendrons Dad had planted blooming pink behind us. Those rhododendrons were gone now. Steve had ripped them out, called them overgrown and messy. The next violation came through a certified letter. Steve was filing permits to add a second-story addition, claiming it would maximize the property's potential. The plans showed a modern box that would destroy the home's craftsman lines, obliterate its historical designation, and essentially rebuild it as a McMansion. I called Mom immediately. A second story? Do you understand what that means? The whole character of the house. Lisa needs space for the baby when they visit, Mom interrupted. And James might move in temporarily while he gets his business sorted. Family helps family. I'm your family. That house is my inheritance. You're being selfish, she said, her voice cold in a way I'd never heard before. Steve says you're probably planning to sell it anyway once I'm gone. At least he's investing in our present, not waiting for my death. The accusation hit like a physical blow. Mom, I would never... I have to go. Lisa needs help with the nursery design. She hung up, leaving me staring at my phone. In 6 months, Steve had turned my mother into a stranger, my childhood home into a construction site, and me into the villain of the story. But the final insult came when I discovered they'd removed the door frame, the one with my height marks from age 3 to 18. I found it in the construction dumpster in the driveway. Those precious pencil marks, Dad's handwriting, still visible under decades of careful preservation. I pulled it out, tears streaming down my face, running my fingers over the notches. 7 years old, lost first tooth. 10 years old, straight A's. 13, taller than Mom. Each mark a memory, each memory a knife in my heart. Steve found me there, holding the door frame like a life raft. Sentimental value doesn't increase property values, he said simply. The new open floor plan requires removing that wall entirely, but don't worry, we're keeping the structure sound. I'm not a monster. No, I thought, looking at his satisfied smile, monsters would be easier to fight. Monsters don't convince your mother to betray everything her husband built. Monsters don't use legal loopholes and sweat equity. Monsters don't smile while they destroy your world and make you look crazy for caring. The isolation started slowly. Then all at once, Steve had been laying groundwork I hadn't seen, spreading his version of events through Mom's social circles like a virus. At the grocery store, Mrs. Henderson, who'd known me since I was 5, turned her back when I said hello. At the coffee shop, Dad's old colleague Mike muttered something about family values and walked away. The narrative was simple and devastating. Ungrateful daughter refuses to let widowed mother move on, selfishly clinging to property while poor Steve just tries to help. Your mom's been through so much, the pastor told me when I sought his support. Steve's been a godsend, helping her heal. Perhaps you should examine your own motivations. Natalie, is this about the house or about accepting your mother's choices? Even Dad's friends from Carter Restorations had been turned. Tom would want Margaret to be happy, they said. He wasn't the type to hold grudges from the grave. But the real betrayal came from within what Steve now called our family. Lisa had moved in temporarily for her third trimester, turning my old bedroom into a nursery. She documented everything on social media. The toxic old paint they removed, Dad's careful restoration with period-appropriate milk paint, the dangerous old wiring they replaced, fully up to code, inspected 2 years ago. The creepy dark wood they painted white, virgin Douglas fir that would make any craftsman weep. Her posts gathered sympathy like coins in a collection plate. So blessed to have Steve's help making this old house safe for baby. Previous owner really let things go. Nesting mode. Family, first, #blessed grandparents. Previous owner, my father, reduced to an anonymous negligent stranger in the narrative of his own home. James contributed his own campaign, posting transformation videos on Instagram. Day 47 of turning this basement disaster into a real gym. Can't believe people actually hoarded all this junk. Home fitness national upgrade, your life damage. No more excuses. Each video showed him destroying more of Dad's workshop. The workbench built from reclaimed ship timber, dismantled. The custom tool cabinet with hand-dovetailed joints, hauled to the dump. The finishing room where Dad had taught me about stains and sealants, gutted for mirror walls. The comments were universally supportive. Your dad's amazing for taking this on. Lucky your mom found someone who cares. That old owner must have been a hoarder. Gross. Steve orchestrated it all while maintaining plausible deniability. He never posted himself, never directly criticized me in public. He just sighed heavily at church when people asked about the situation, shaking his head sadly. We're trying to be patient with Natalie. Grief makes people act out. We're praying she'll come around. The financial pressure started next. Bills appeared in my mailbox. Invoices for the construction work, the new roof, the electrical updates. As the legal owner, the letters stated, you are responsible for 50% of all home improvements per Oregon property law. $30,000, then 40, then 50. I didn't authorize any of this. I told the lawyer I consulted. It doesn't matter if your mother, as resident, approved the work for safety reasons, he explained. Steve's being clever. He's creating a paper trail showing investment in the property. If you can't pay, he can put a lien on the house. But it's my house, which you're not occupying, and which he's improving with your mother's consent. It's a gray area that could tie you up in court for years. Mom called me on a Thursday, her voice brittle with rehearsed talking points. Steve and I are getting married next month. Small ceremony. You're invited. Of course. But only if you can be supportive. Mom, please. Lisa's having the baby soon. We need stability. Steve's been patient. But he won't wait forever. Either you accept our family or... Our family? Mom, we were a family. You, me, and Dad. Your father is dead, Natalie. The words came out sharp, cutting. I'm choosing life. Steve makes me feel alive. You make me feel guilty for not crawling into the grave with your father. That's not true. Isn't it? Every time you look at me, I see judgment. Every time you come here, you're looking for what's changed, what's wrong, what Steve's ruined. You don't see that he's saving me. Saving you? Mom, he's erasing Dad from existence. Maybe that's what I need. She was crying now, but her tears felt weaponized. Maybe I don't want to live in a shrine. Maybe I want to forget the man who left me alone. The words hung between us like a curse. She didn't mean them. I knew she didn't mean them. But Steve had given her permission to say them, to use Dad's death as ammunition against me. The baby shower invitation arrived the next day. Lisa had addressed it with condescending sweetness. Aunt Natalie, please celebrate our growing family. Inside, a note from Steve. Let's put the past behind us. Margaret needs her daughter. Don't let pride destroy what's left of your relationship. Pride, as if fighting for my father's legacy was about pride. I attended the shower, held in the backyard where Dad had built the pergola for Mom's climbing roses. The roses were gone, replaced with artificial turf. Low maintenance, Steve explained to the guests. Modern living solutions. The other guests, Mom's book club, church friends, neighbors, treated me like a ticking bomb. Careful smiles, cautious small talk, eyes that said they'd heard all about the situation. Lisa opened gifts while perched on Mom's chair. Steve's hand possessive on Mom's shoulder. James filming everything for social media. "This is from Natalie," Lisa announced, holding up my gift, a handmade wooden toy I'd commissioned from one of Dad's restoration friends. How vintage. The guests tittered politely. Steve caught my eye and smiled, that practiced, predatory smile that said he'd already won. That night, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was a photo of the house, my house, with a "for sale by owner" sign photoshopped onto the lawn. No message, just the image. Then another text, from Mom's phone, but clearly Steve's words. "Consider your options carefully. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. Your choice." I sat in my apartment, holding the salvaged doorframe, the only piece of Dad I'd managed to save, and finally understood. This wasn't about the house anymore. It was about power. Steve didn't just want the property. He wanted to break me, to prove he could take everything that mattered and make me thank him for it. But he'd made one mistake. He thought I was alone. He was wrong. The psychological warfare escalated with calculated precision. Steve had studied me like a blueprint, finding every structural weakness to exploit. The bills kept coming: roofing, plumbing, electrical, each one copied to Mom's church friends, Dad's former colleagues, even my employer. Financial responsibility is a sign of character, Steve would say at Sunday dinners I was still invited to but could barely endure. Some people inherit assets but not the maturity to manage them. The congregation nodded along, looking at me with barely concealed pity. Poor Natalie, unable to let go, forcing her mother to live in limbo. Then came the concern calls, Mom's friends, reaching out with practiced scripts. "Your mother worries about you, dear. This obsession with the house isn't healthy." Steve's been so patient. Not many men would tolerate such hostility from a stepdaughter. "Have you considered therapy? Complicated grief can manifest in destructive ways." Each call chipped away at my sanity. Was I being unreasonable? Was I destroying my relationship with my mother over wood and nails? But then I'd touch the salvaged doorframe, trace Dad's handwriting, and remember, this wasn't about property, it was about truth. The master stroke came through Lisa's pregnancy, now 8 months along. She'd become Steve's perfect weapon. At a family dinner I couldn't avoid, she clutched her belly and sighed dramatically. "I just worry about raising our baby in such a toxic environment," she announced to the table. "All this conflict over material possessions, what kind of example does that set?" "You're absolutely right," Steve said, patting her hand. "Children need stability, not relatives who prioritize property over people." Mom nodded, avoiding my eyes. "Family should come first." "Exactly," James chimed in, smirking at me. "Some people just can't let go of the past. It's actually pretty sad." I set down my fork carefully, my hands shaking. "The past? You mean my father? The man whose house you're destroying?" "See?" Lisa turned to Mom with tears, definitely rehearsed, in her eyes. "This negativity, I don't think I can bring the baby here if Natalie keeps attacking us." The ultimatum hung in the air like smoke. Choose, your father's memory or your mother's future grandchild. "That's not fair," I whispered. "Fair?" Steve leaned back, that satisfied smile playing on his lips. "Was it fair when you tried to prevent your mother from moving forward? Was it fair when you made her feel guilty for finding happiness?" You show up here, cataloging changes like a building inspector. You treat your mother's home like a museum she's not qualified to curate. You've made yourself the villain here. Natalie, we're just trying to build a family." Build. The word hurt more than any insult. They were building their family on the ruins of mine. The legal harassment intensified. Certified letters arrived weekly. Mechanics' liens for the construction work. Property tax bills sent to my apartment, though Mom still lived there. Notices about zoning variances for Steve's planned addition. Then came the social media campaign. Lisa started a blog. Blending Families. Our Journey. Each post painted me as the bitter stepdaughter who couldn't accept her mother's happiness. She never used my name, but anyone in our circle knew exactly who N was. N accused Steve of destroying the house today. Steve, who spent his own money fixing a leaking roof. Some people don't understand gratitude. Pregnancy is hard enough without toxic relatives creating drama. Protecting my baby from negative energy is my top priority. Steve gave N another chance at dinner. She threw it in his face. Some people choose misery. The comments poured in. Dozens of strangers and acquaintances validating Steve's narrative. I became Portland's worst daughter. The cautionary tale whispered about at coffee shops and grocery stores. My work suffered. My supervisor called me in after someone, definitely Steve or James, sent an anonymous concern about my mental stability. I have to ask, she said carefully. Is everything okay at home? We've received some troubling information about your behavior outside work. My stepfather is trying to steal my inheritance, I said flatly. She winced. Natalie, grief counseling is available through our EAP program. Perhaps you should consider. I'm not grieving. I'm being systematically destroyed. The look she gave me, pity mixed with doubt, told me Steve had won this round too. The breaking point came when I discovered Steve had filed paperwork to have himself added to the deed as Mom's spouse, citing marital property rights and the sweat equity from his improvements. My lawyer was blunt. He's built a strong case, documented investments, your mother's support, your absence from the property. You could fight it, but it'll cost tens of thousands and take years. It's my house. My father left it to me. And you left it occupied by others who've been maintaining and improving it. Possession is 9/10 of the law, and perception is the rest. Right now, you're perceived as the problem. That night, I sat in Dad's Mustang, still unfinished in a storage unit I rented to save it from Steve, and cried until I couldn't breathe. Every system designed to protect me had been turned against me. Law, family, community, even memory itself. All weapons in Steve's arsenal. My phone buzzed. Mom. Steve says you hired a lawyer. How could you? We're family. I laughed, bitter and broken. Family doesn't steal from each other. Mom. No one's stealing anything. Steve just wants security for our future. Why are you being so cruel? Why are you letting him erase Dad? Silence, then. Your father left me. Steve stayed. Make your choice. Natalie, the house or your mother. You can't have both. After she hung up, I found another text from the unknown number. This time, it was a photo of legal documents, a restraining order request, already filled out, claiming I was harassing Steve's family. The message below was clear. Back off or we file. Your choice. I sat in that cold storage unit, surrounded by Dad's tools I'd managed to save, his unfinished car, the door frame with my childhood marked in pencil, and realized Steve had orchestrated everything perfectly. I looked unstable, bitter, irrational. He looked like the patient stepfather trying to hold a family together despite the disturbed daughter's behavior. But there was one thing Steve didn't know, one card I hadn't played. Dad had been smarter than all of us, and somewhere in his careful documentation, in the papers he'd filed and the plans he'd made, was the weapon I needed. I just had to find it. Rebecca Dawson didn't look like Portland's most feared estate attorney, 5 feet 2 inches, silver-haired, wearing a cardigan with cat prints. She looked like someone's grandmother who'd wandered into a law office by mistake, but when she reviewed my father's papers, her eyes sharpened like surgical instruments. Your father was thorough, she said, spreading documents across her conference table. Remarkably thorough. Tell me, did he ever mention why he structured his will this way? He just said he wanted to make sure I got the house. No, Rebecca smiled. And suddenly I understood why developers feared her. He wanted to make sure no one could take it from you. There's a difference. Your father filed something very interesting with the city 5 years ago. She pulled out a document stamped with the Portland Historical Society seal. Historical landmark designation, not just for the house, for the entire property, including all original architectural elements. Any modifications require approval from the Historical Commission. My heart started racing. Steve's changed everything, the floors, the fixtures. Without permits from the Historical Commission? That's criminal destruction of a historical landmark. But there's more. She produced another file. Your father established a preservation trust. You're not just the owner, you're the trustee. The house cannot be sold, transferred, or modified without trust approval. And guess who he named as co-trustee? She slid a paper across to me. The name made me gasp. Judge Harold Morrison, retired. Harry Morrison was your father's client and friend. He restored Harry's Victorian in Irvington. Harry takes historical preservation very seriously, and he's been watching what's happening to your father's house. He has? Oh yes, he's documented everything, every illegal modification, every unpermitted change. He's been waiting for you to come forward. Rebecca leaned back. Your father knew something might happen to him. Heart disease runs in his family. He saw what happened when his brother died. The family fought over everything, so he built you a fortress of legal protection. Steve Patterson just spent 6 months providing evidence of his own crimes. I stared at the papers, Dad's careful handwriting in the margins, his methodical planning evident in every clause, even in death. He was protecting me. What about the sweat equity claim? Rebecca actually laughed. Sweat equity requires legal permission from the owner and proper documentation. Did you give permission? Never. Then what Steve calls investments are actually criminal damage. He owes you restoration costs. But here's the beautiful part. She pulled out another document. Your father purchased restoration insurance. If anyone damages the historical elements of the house, insurance covers full restoration to original specifications, and the insurance company? They'll go after Steve for damages. My mother consented to the changes. Your mother isn't the owner. She's a tenant by your allowance. Her consent means nothing legally. Rebecca's expression softened slightly. I know this is hard, family-wise, but legally, Steve Patterson is finished. We scheduled the first meeting for Monday. Rebecca sent formal notices to Steve's lawyer. Yes, he'd already retained one, requiring his presence. She also contacted the Portland Historical Commission, the insurance company, and Judge Morrison. Steve's response was predictable. The harassment escalated. Mom called sobbing, saying I was destroying her life. Lisa posted about family members who choose property over people and how it was affecting her pregnancy. James started showing up at my apartment building, not doing anything illegal, just standing there, watching. But Rebecca had anticipated this too. Document everything, every call, every post, every appearance. It's evidence of harassment and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The meeting arrived like a storm front. Steve walked in with his lawyer, all confidence and condescension. Mom came too, clutching his arm like a life preserver. They sat across from Rebecca and me. Steve's smile saying he still thought he could win. Let's make this simple, his lawyer began. My client has invested substantially in improving. Destroying, Rebecca interrupted, sliding a thick folder across the table. Your client has criminally destroyed a registered historical landmark. Page 1. Original floor plans filed with the city. Page 20. Photographs of unauthorized demolition. Page 40. Estimates for restoration. Currently at $300,000. Steve's smile flickered. Those were improvements. Page 60. The historical designation clearly stating no modifications without commission approval. Page 70. The preservation trust documents. Your client has no claim to this property. He never did. The sweat equity is criminal damage. Page 80. Relevant criminal codes. Destruction of historical property is a felony in Oregon. Your client could face 5 years in prison. The room went silent. Mom's face had gone white. Steve's lawyer was rapidly reading, his expression shifting from confident to concerned. Furthermore, Rebecca continued, we have documentation of financial fraud, billing my client for unauthorized work, harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and elderly financial abuse. Elderly? Steve sputtered. Margaret's only 59. And you've manipulated her into supporting criminal destruction of her late husband's estate. The DA's Elder Abuse Unit will be very interested. Judge Morrison chose that moment to enter. 80 years old, wearing a bow tie and radiating authority. He looked at Steve with undisguised contempt. Mr. Patterson, he said quietly, I watched Thomas Carter resurrect my family home with these hands. He held up fingers gnarled with age. He spent 8 months on my library alone, matching wood grain I thought was lost forever. You destroyed his life's work in 6 months of ignorance and greed. Steve's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear. Mom was crying silently. Steve's face had gone from red to pale. What do you want? Steve finally asked, his voice stripped of its usual smoothness. Rebecca smiled. Immediate vacation of the property. All residents out within 14 days. Full payment of restoration costs. A restraining order keeping you 500 feet from my client and the property. And a written apology to be read at the next Portland Historical Society meeting. That's ridiculous. The alternative is criminal prosecution, Judge Morrison said. I've already spoken with the DA. She's very interested in making an example of someone who thinks historical preservation laws don't apply to them. Steve looked at Mom, but she was staring at the photographs Rebecca had spread out. The before pictures Dad had taken, the after pictures showing Steve's destruction. Her face crumbled as she saw what had really been done. You told me it was improvements, she whispered to Steve. You said we were making it better. We were. You destroyed his bookshelf, the one he built for Natalie. She pulled her arm away from him. You threw away the door frame with her height marks. Margaret, honey? Don't. She stood up, shaking. I need air. She left without looking at me. Steve started to follow, but his lawyer grabbed his arm, shaking his head. The negotiation was swift after that. Steve had no leverage, no options. Sign the agreement or face prosecution. His lawyer advised him to sign. The courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined. More intimate, which somehow made it worse. I could see every twitch in Steve's jaw, every tear on Mom's face, every smirk James couldn't quite suppress. Lisa sat in the back, hand on her belly, playing the victim even here. Rebecca had warned me, this isn't just about winning. It's about documenting everything so thoroughly that any appeal becomes impossible. Judge Patricia Brennan presided, not Judge Morrison, who'd recused himself due to personal involvement, but his former colleague, who shared his passion for historical preservation. She'd reviewed the case files with the kind of attention usually reserved for murder trials. Mr. Patterson, she began, her voice cutting through the room's tension. I've reviewed extensive documentation regarding your modifications to the Carter residence. Do you have permits from the Portland Historical Commission for any of these changes? Steve's lawyer stood. Your Honor, my client believed he was making necessary improvements. That's not what I asked. Do you have permits? No, Your Honor. Are you aware that destroying designated historical features is a felony in Oregon? Steve shifted in his seat. His lawyer answered. My client was not aware of the historical designation. Rebecca stood smoothly. Your Honor, I'd like to submit Exhibit 47, a signed receipt from Mr. Patterson's company for the purchase of the historical designation plaque that he removed from the property's exterior. The courtroom went silent. Steve had literally bought and hidden the evidence of the home's protected status. Judge Brennan's expression hardened. Mr. Patterson, you removed a historical marker? Steve's voice came out strangled. It was unsightly. It was legal notice. You deliberately concealed the property's protected status while destroying its historical features. Rebecca continued her methodical destruction. Email after email appeared on the courtroom screen. Steve discussing the home's value. Once we gut the old garbage, James joking about trashing Grandpa's junk, Lisa requesting that they modernize everything before the baby arrives. But the most damaging evidence came from Steve's own phone. Rebecca had subpoenaed his texts through the discovery process. "Can you read this message you sent to James, dated 3 months ago?" Rebecca asked, highlighting the text on screen. Steve's lawyer objected, but Judge Brennan overruled him. Steve read in a monotone, "Once we get Natalie to break, the house is ours. Margaret won't fight us. Few more months and we can flip it for twice its value." Mom made a sound, half gasp, half sob. She'd been staring at her hands, but now she looked at Steve with an expression I'd never seen before. Pure betrayal. "And this one?" Rebecca highlighted another text. "From 5 months ago? The old lady is eating out of my hand. The daughter's the only problem." The old lady, my mother, the woman he claimed to love. "Your Honor," Rebecca said, "we have 43 similar texts showing Mr. Patterson's deliberate plan to manipulate Mrs. Carter, destroy the historical property, and profit from its sale." Steve's facade finally cracked. "It's just business. That house is worth $2 million if developed properly. These people are sitting on gold and wasting it on sentiment." "These people?" Judge Brennan asked quietly. "You mean your wife and stepdaughter?" "They're not my family," Steve exploded, his lawyer frantically trying to quiet him. "Margaret's a means to an end, and her daughter's a spoiled brat who doesn't deserve—" "Steve!" Mom stood up, shaking. "How could you?" "Sit down, Margaret. You're too emotional to understand." "I understand perfectly." Mom's voice broke. "You used me. You used my grief. You made me betray my daughter, my husband's memory, everything." "Your husband's dead," Steve shouted. "Dead, and his precious house should die with him." The silence that followed was deafening. Even James looked uncomfortable. Lisa had started crying. Real tears this time. Judge Brennan cleared her throat. "I've heard enough, Mr. Patterson. You've admitted to deliberate fraud, elder abuse, and destruction of historical property. This court finds in favor of the plaintiff on all counts." She detailed the judgment: immediate eviction, full restoration costs of $347,000, punitive damages of $500,000, and a permanent restraining order. Additionally, she referred the case to the criminal division for prosecution. "Mr. Patterson, you represent the worst kind of predator, someone who exploits grief for profit. This court ensures you will never profit from your cruelty." Steve's lawyer requested time to appeal, but Judge Brennan denied it. "Your client confessed in open court. There are no grounds for appeal. 14 days to vacate or face immediate arrest." As the gavel fell, Steve turned to Mom one last time. "You stupid woman. You could have had everything." "I had everything," Mom replied quietly, "until I met you." The courtroom began to empty. James helped Lisa stand, both avoiding eye contact with everyone. Steve stormed out with his lawyer, already on the phone, probably trying to salvage something from the wreckage. Mom and I stood facing each other across the aisle. She looked older, frailer, like the past 6 months had aged her a decade. "Natalie, She stopped, tears streaming. "I don't expect forgiveness. I betrayed you. I betrayed your father. I betrayed myself. I let that man convince me that moving forward meant erasing the past." "Mom." "No, let me finish. You fought for what was right, and I fought against you. I chose a stranger over my own daughter. I let him destroy everything your father built, everything we built as a family. I don't deserve—" I crossed the aisle and hugged her. She collapsed against me, sobbing like I hadn't heard since Dad's funeral. We stood there, holding each other in the empty courtroom, mother and daughter finding each other again in the ruins of Steve's deception. "The house can be restored," I whispered. "We can't get back the last 6 months, but we can restore what matters." "How? After everything I said, everything I did?" "Dad would forgive you. He always said people make mistakes when they're hurting, and you were hurting. Mom, Steve knew exactly how to exploit that. Rebecca approached us carefully. Mrs. Carter, if you're willing, we'd like your testimony in the criminal case. What Mr. Patterson did, manipulating you during your grief, that's a serious crime. Mom straightened, wiping her eyes. Yes, I'll testify. He shouldn't be able to do this to anyone else. As we left the courthouse together, Mom stopped at the door. The door frame, the one with your height marks. Do you still have it? It's in storage, with Dad's tools and everything else I could save. Could we put it back when we restore the house? I squeezed her hand. We'll put it all back. Mom, every piece we can save, every memory we can restore. Dad built that house to last forever. And it will, she said firmly. This time, it will. Behind us, through the courthouse windows, I saw Steve being escorted to a police car. His empire of manipulation finally collapsed. He'd thought he could erase my father's legacy, steal our home, destroy our family. He'd thought wrong. The restoration took 6 months, exactly as long as Steve's destruction. But this time, every hammer strike was an act of love. Every saved board a small victory. Mom and I worked together, our hands learning the rhythm Dad's had known so well. The contractor we hired was Dad's old apprentice, Marcus, who'd started Carter Restoration's successor company. When he saw the damage, he actually cried. Tom taught me everything on this house, he said. We'll make it right. The floors came first. Under Steve's cheap laminate, the original Douglas fir had survived, scarred but salvageable. Marcus and his team spent weeks sanding, treating, bringing back the golden glow Dad had loved. Mom spent hours on her knees beside them, learning the work, understanding finally what Dad had built with his hands. I never appreciated it, she told me one evening, running her fingers along the restored grain. 40 years in this house, and I never really saw it until it was almost gone. The bookshelf was harder. Steve had destroyed the original, but I had Dad's plans. Every measurement, every joint detailed in his careful handwriting. Marcus and I rebuilt it together, using reclaimed oak from the same era. When we mounted it, Mom broke down completely. He built this while I was pregnant with you, she whispered. Said every child deserved books within reach. The door frame went back on a Thursday. Marcus removed the modern casing Steve had installed, and we carefully fitted the original back into place. All my height marks, all Dad's notes, returned to where they belonged. Mom added a new one. Natalie, 34 years, tall enough to carry her father's legacy. Judge Morrison visited during the restoration, bringing coffee and stories about Dad. He'd work until his hands bled, Harry told us, but he'd never cut corners. Built right lasts forever, he'd say. The kitchen took the longest. Steve had gutted Dad's careful work, but the bones remained. We found period-appropriate fixtures, restored the original cabinets hiding in the basement, brought back the breakfast nook where our family had shared thousands of meals. Some things couldn't be restored. The stained glass transom Steve had sold was gone forever, but the artist's grandson, hearing our story, created a new piece. Different, but honoring the original design. When the light hit it that first morning, casting colored shadows across Dad's floors, it felt like forgiveness. Steve's money paid for everything. The civil judgment had been swift and merciless, and the criminal case moved forward. He'd pled guilty to avoid trial, receiving 2 years in prison and 5 years probation. James and Lisa disappeared from our lives entirely, moving to California, never to contact us again. But the real restoration wasn't about wood and stone. It was about Mom and me, working side by side. We talked about Dad without the weight of Steve's manipulation. We shared stories, laughed at memories, cried over losses. We became not just mother and daughter again, but friends. I was so lonely, Mom admitted one day, painting the restored trim. Your dad was everything, and when he died, I couldn't breathe. Steve made me feel like I could breathe again, but it was poison air. You were vulnerable. He was a predator. That's not your fault. But betraying you was my choice. I'll carry that forever. Then we'll carry it together, That's what family does. The house was officially rededicated on a Saturday in spring. The Portland Historical Society held a ceremony, and half the city seemed to attend. Dad's old clients, craftsmen he'd mentored, neighbors who'd watched him transform the neighborhood. They all came. Marcus spoke about Dad's legacy. Judge Morrison read a proclamation making the house a protected landmark in perpetuity. But Mom's speech brought the house down. This house was built by love, attacked by greed, and saved by courage, she said, holding my hand. My daughter fought when I was too weak to fight. She stood when I fell. She honored her father when I let grief blind me. This house stands because Natalie stood first. Later, as the crowd thinned, we sat on the restored porch swing, looking at Dad's roses, replanted from cuttings a neighbor had saved. He'd be proud, Mom said softly. Of the house? Of you, of how you fought, of how you forgave. Dad always said the foundation matters most. We just had to dig down to find it again. As the sun set through the new stained glass, casting rainbows across the restored floors, I heard Dad's voice in the settling of old wood, in the whisper of wind through original windows. Steve had tried to silence it, to bury it under modern lies and plastic facades, but truth, like good craftsmanship, endures. The house stood, weathered, scarred, but unbroken, like Mom, like me, like the love that built it and the love that saved it. That night, I found Mom in Dad's workshop, running her hands over his restored workbench. I want to learn, she said. Everything he knew. Will you teach me? I picked up Dad's favorite hammer, the one James had tried to throw away, the one I'd saved from the dumpster. Its weight was familiar, comforting. We'll learn together, I said. That's what Dad would want. 6 months later, Mom and I finished the Mustang. It wasn't perfect. We weren't the craftsmen Dad had been, but when the engine roared to life, when we drove it down the street where Dad had taught me to drive, where he'd built our life board by board, we knew we'd done more than restore a car or a house. We'd restored ourselves. The house stands today as a testament not just to my father's craftsmanship, but to the power of truth over manipulation, love over greed, and the unbreakable bonds that even the best con artist can't destroy. Steve thought he could erase my father and steal our legacy. Instead, he taught us how strong we really were. Thank you for listening to my story. I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Please comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your own thoughts about family, legacy, and standing up for what's right. Your stories matter too.